back, everyone, and thanks for joining us again for part 2 of our wine appreciation classes with Gail Sotelo. Hi, Gail.
Hello, thanks for having me back.
Thanks again. So now we're going to continue our discussion, and I think it's a really great topic as well. I mean, once you've purchased wine and you're starting to keep wine at home, I think the most important is knowing how to keep wine, how to store it, and how to properly maybe even age it, if that's possible.
So aging and cellaring, what we're talking about for today. When you've already gotten to that point where you figured out that, okay, I really want to get into this, I want to get into wine as a hobby, one of the things that I always advise people is you want to be able to make sure that you store it properly, because you don't want your investments, you don't want the thing that you're keeping and you're planning to keep for upwards of X number of years in a very terrible condition, because by the time that you'd be able to open that up, that's not going to be in its optimum condition, and it will be a total shame wasting all those years if you don't store your wines correctly. The first thing that I always talk about in terms of storing your wine is refrigeration. The biggest misunderstanding is when I say refrigeration, people automatically think in the same place where you store your eggs, you store your water. So that's not what we're talking about. If you really want to get into the hobby of getting your wine, storing your wine for a long amount of time, you want to invest in proper wine refrigeration. And there's a myriad of those are out in the market right now. And I do believe that you're planning to carry a few in the future, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so you'll be able to get it from Celina herself. So apart from that, the reason why you want to be able to invest in these devices is that those devices are designed to be temperature controlled. It has to stay in a constant temperature as opposed to a refrigeration unit. The reason why the refrigerator that you have at home for your eggs, for your milk, is not as constant is because people will keep on opening and closing that. And that small thing, those small instances, will actually change the temperature inside the refrigerator, which is not the ideal situation for wine, because ideally speaking, wine at its optimum condition has to be in a constant temperature. It shouldn't be 10 degrees today, 11 degrees tomorrow, 15 degrees 5 minutes later. It shouldn't be that way. It should be at a constant temperature. Wine cellars, wine refrigeration systems are designed to do just that, because you're not going to keep on opening and closing your wine cellar. That's not what your purpose is for that. Now, some people also ask, well, is it totally not advisable to use a refrigerator for these for your wines? Honestly, I would say the only reason why you want to use that is for when you're about to consume your wine within the same day. So especially for white wines, you want to keep it really, really nice and cold and chilled. But you want to be able to immediately consume that wine already. You don't want to store that there for upwards of weeks. You don't want to do that. And the other reason is if your bottle is already open. Now, if you already have an open bottle and you haven't consumed it within the day, which I think is not a problem for Celina and myself, everything gets consumed immediately. Having said that, if you want to consume your wine a little longer, a couple of days, you can opt to flip the cork, put it back onto the bottle, and then store it upwards in the refrigerator. But my advice is not to keep it longer than 3 days. Some wines do develop better after 3 days, but those are very rare instances. There's a bigger possibility that after 3 days, that's not going to be in its optimum condition anymore. Those are the things that I can tell you about refrigeration. The other thing that you want to take into consideration when you're storing your wine for a long time is the position. Now, my advice is not to store your wine in this manner upward for a long amount of time, especially for those which have traditional forks like this one. So for perspective, this is something with a traditional fork. This is a screw cap bottle. The reason is if you store it upright for X amount of weeks, X amount of months, and even years if that's your plan, you would not allow the wine to interact with the cork. What that does is that it dries up the cork, and if the cork dries up, you could potentially introduce air, and that means oxygenation. One of the enemies of wine is oxygen, so you don't want to be able to allow that to happen. Hence the reason this is the ideal position for your bottle when you're storing your wine, especially wine with traditional cork. Now, the other thing that you want to take into consideration is keeping it far away from sunlight as possible. Because similar with paintings, I'm sure you've had a poster at home that has faded out over time because you left it out near the window. So similar with wine, the UV rays would cause damage to the state of the wine. You don't want to do that. And lastly, vibration. Again, apart from the refrigeration, the standard refrigerator rather, being opened and closed so regularly, which would vibrate your wine, you don't want to keep it at a state where there's like a lot of movement, because it could potentially damage the inside of the wine. One of the most, shall we say, motion-sensitive grapes out there is actually a Tempranillo, which is predominantly what's in this bottle of Rioja. So it's been vibrated too much. If it's had too much movement, it could potentially not be in its optimum state. Which is why I also advise people, if you're about to serve wine, and if you just bought it from the store, you want to be able to wait 24 hours, because you want to get the wine to relax so that it will be in its optimum condition by the time you serve it.
Yes, totally. Thank you so much. I think it's a great start already, because a lot of people don't have chillers. So I think when you purchase a bottle of wine, I think 9 times out of 10, if you're just right at the beginning of your journey with wine, or you're not a professional, you're gonna stick it in the fridge. And most probably you're gonna be like, oh, I'll put it in this morning because I'll be drinking it tonight. I have friends coming over, let me cool it down. And so they stick it in the fridge. Or they probably bought their wines a long time ago and it's been sitting around in a dusty cabinet kasi, it's Papa's wine, I won't drink it. Or, ay, regalo yan, it's a gift, I don't want to drink it. So they leave it there. And I think a lot of people damage their wines more than often than not. And I think it's important to know that you're not going to enjoy that wine because you're going to wonder, okay, it's a gift, it's something special. And if you don't know how to store it, you're also not going to enjoy the maximum flavors and what really the winery was trying to communicate in terms of its best notes and bouquet. So you're really not going to get those notes. So when you read about the wine, because usually that's what I do, and I really advise people out there to do this, when you do drink wine, research about it, especially if it's a new wine. You can open an app like Vivino or what, and they'll tell you, oh, it's got ruby red color and it's got cherry notes and blackberry, but it's got a bit of a summery taste to it. So you're gonna get that, and you're like drinking it, and you're wondering, bakit hindi? And a lot of people tell me, I've had this a lot of times, but di ba wine should be aged? Mas masarap daw pag tumagal. And I'm like, yes, but you have to store it properly. So these are really, really important tips. And again, putting it in the fridge, say, oh, I'll just have a little now, and then baka this weekend na lang yung tira when my friends come over. The fact that you just opened it and left it in the fridge for, say, a week or so, by the time your friends are coming to enjoy the wine, it doesn't taste the same as well. Well, we're in Davao, so maybe your wine tastes like durian na because you have durian in the
and speaking of Davao, because I understand that, because I do have family there, and whenever I come visit, I always feel like, Davao is significantly hotter versus Manila. And the thing is, one of the things that people always think is that, it says here in the back, wine has to be stored in room temperature, I'll just leave it in my room. People have to understand that, the person who wrote this or who came up with the notion of room temperature are the Europeans. And in Europe, temperature is about 18 degrees Celsius. So that's what it means. And in Davao, it is not. In Manila, it's still not. So if you store it in room temperature according to Filipino standards, your wine is seriously going to go bad. In fact, for perspective, the ideal range that you want to store your wine is between 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. That's the ideal situation. So again, what would help you with that is a proper refrigeration system if you really want to store your wine for posterity. I actually have a bottle downstairs of Touriga Nacional. It's a Portuguese wine. It's a very robust wine. There's another tip if you want to store your wine. The more robust wines tend to last much, much longer. So that thing I'm planning to open 60 years after I got it. Yeah, there's a story behind that particular wine. The winemakers decided to make it on their 60th anniversary. And I'm planning to be able to open it on our 60th anniversary. It will be pretty interesting.
Oh, these
Yeah.
are all really, really good tips. One last question though. So you did say that it's better to keep it lying down, but
Yeah.
here we have a screw cap. So is that necessary to lie down the wine if
Honestly,
it's screw cap?
honestly, for screw caps, it's still a bit of a conundrum. But you technically can be able to store it a little longer upright. But sometimes there is an issue when it comes to sedimentation. For reds especially, they're more prone to sedimentation as time goes by. So what that does is that there would be little flecks of the leftover yeast that will settle at the bottom of your wine. Now, if it's upright like that, even if it's a screw cap, the thing you want to do is to be able to eliminate that sedimentation is to be able to decant using a decanter, which is something that I have here. You want to transfer your wine into a decanter to be able to get rid of that sedimentation. Sedimentation, for perspective, doesn't make your wine any worse. It's just not a pleasant feeling in your mouth to have that gravelly sensation. So if you store your wine upright, even if it's in a screw cap over X number of years, you would have a harder time decanting that. There's a big chance for the sedimentation to go outward from the bottle as you transfer it to your glass.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for this amazing tips for the second part of our episode series. We'll be back for some more in our third episode, and I hope everyone learned as much as I did. And thanks for sharing your tips, Gail. It's always amazing to hear. Thanks, everyone.
You're
Bye.
welcome.